That was such
Wherever you get your podcasts. Do you want me to start again?
That was such an outlandish intro.
Hello and welcome to On the Same Page, a podcast in which two mates separated by oceans and hemispheres talk about books and catch each other up on life between the lines. Unfortunately, we can't get together in person, but through this podcast we hope to get on the same page. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you get your podcast from, you're in luck because this is a podcast. As always, I'm joined with Blake. Blake, how are you?
I am not too shabby. I am a bit fatigued, not just because it took us over an hour to sort out some audio issues, which didn't end up getting sorted out so much as miraculously curing themselves, which is actually like more frustrating in and of itself because we don't know what the problem was, but nothing was working, even though everything said it was working. It
just proves there was no problem.
Oh, God. It was all in our heads. And the call is coming from inside the house.
What a good film. When a Stranger Calls. Oh, yeah. God. So this is our first episode back online over the old Zoom and
it's probably a good thing as well.
Recording devices.
Well, a good thing for you because I have COVID-19, so we wouldn't want to be doing this in person. Bound to happen after international flights, I guess. My girlfriend Samira picked it up on her flight. I was testing negative and then tested positive first time this morning, but I had symptoms a few days ago. So now just trucking along, headache, had a throat thing for a couple of days. That's still going on. Drinking some bronchial tea as we speak. A lot of lozenges.
Lovely.
If Samira's symptoms are to be expected, then I've probably got a couple more days. Thankfully, it hit me on the weekend, which is just classic.
Lucky you.
Annoying. All week I could have been sitting in bed.
Had some sick leave. Yeah.
God damn it. So if I cough or whatever during this, I apologise. But I mean, I'm just thankful that
I will edit it out.
All. Yeah.
That's true, but I will edit it out, so don't worry, people.
Well, I mean, not too shabby.
Did you have any inner shelf moments this week?
Oh, yes. I mean, I probably had a few, actually. I mean, I was probably in the middle of one. The other one I was thinking of, because we've talked about it on a different podcast, and I think on our travel writing podcast, I spoke about there being a Werner Herzog Bruce Chatwin film, which I hadn't been able to see.
Yep.
But I did see it this week.
Oh, nice.
And so watched that, and he kind of goes around with Bruce's old knapsack and kind of, I don't know, relive some old memories, talk to some biographers, talks to his widow, talks to some other people, and just kind of generally just vibes on some good Bruceness. It was pretty good. I mean, it's standard like Werner Herzog, like Bruce Chatwin was. and then there's just some inspiring imagery of Australia and wherever else he travelled. Good film.
Cracking.
And the other one I was going to talk about, only just because I looked it up like a second ago. I was like, I must have some notes on the book we're about to talk about today, or Hemingway, and I was thinking about, maybe I'll find a fact or fiction for our fact or fiction section.
Yes.
But what I did find was a random journal entry of mine, amongst lots of references to Hemingway, from like years ago, where I'd woken up in the middle of the night and kind of like tried to type out a dream as close to waking from it as possible. And I was just scanning through it, and then our audio issues ensued, so I stopped. But basically what the gist of it seemed to be was that I had a kind of conversation with late Hemingway, and then we went fishing. Nice. In the dream I had like a photograph the photograph was taken of like me in the foreground and Hemingway in the background, old Hemingway holding like a big fish. I think it looked like a red snapper. And then it was revealed that actually it was a dream within a dream, because then there was a kind of upper dream in which I was wondering, I just had a dream about talking to Hemingway, and then I opened some mail and there was the photograph as if it was real. The whole thing had been
get
real.
Christopher Nolan on the line.
I know. So, I don't know who could play me. I mean, but seriously. So I don't know. Inception, Hemingway, A Dream from I don't know how many years ago, a long time ago. But I just came across
what a find, a little gem. Yeah.
How about you?
This week I went and saw the new Batman film, which was absolutely wonderful, insane.
Oh, really?
So good. Yeah. So good, so gritty, really dark. You might not like it as much because it's just like constant plaguing anxiety the whole time. Very dark, dim and dreary, but it was fucking amazing.
Yeah, I'm going to say nope. I mean, I don't know. What's your comparison to the Dark Knight trilogy in terms of it's just 10 times darker, or it's
it's dark. It makes Christopher Nolan's one look Disney.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
So it's very dark. It's just raining constantly. It takes place at night the whole time, and
real Arkham City vibes.
Real Arkham City vibes, but what's his name? Paul Dano is the Riddler. Is just phenomenal. I mean, it's kind of scary how it's obviously unrealistic because he's the Riddler and it's Batman, but it's quite realistic in terms of like he's using online like Reddits and stuff like that to learn how to make bombs and stuff like that, and you're like, oh, this shit happens. Geez. Yeah. So very intense, but very good. And
Zoe Kravitz plays Catwoman.
Yes,
what's the vibe
Catwoman. There? Yeah, she's stunning. Yeah, very good. Very, very
better
good.
than Halle Berry's performance or Michelle Pfeiffer?
Yeah. She's a very good Catwoman. You forgot Anne Hathaway as well in Dark Knight Rises.
Well, she was a good one, but I feel like Halle Berry and Michelle Pfeiffer were kind of like pilloried for like terrible performances. I don't know. But
no, she's very good.
Right, because Anne Hathaway had a good script where it wasn't so Catwoman-y. They didn't have her licking anyone and stuff.
That's true. And then there was Colin Farrell as Penguin, and he's sick as well.
Oh, wow.
He's just been signed up for a HBO TV spin-off series, as is the way with all these kind of things these days. But he's very good, very gangster. Yeah, the Penguin.
Oh, wow. Can't be Danny DeVito, though.
He's done
Those
pretty
are the
good.
Worst films.
The Tim Burton films. Yeah.
Oh, you know, when Batman comes out with nipples, you're just like, oh, come on. Stop this.
Stop it now.
Oh, God.
So that was my inner shelf, but we can't stay there forever. On with the show.
Well, I mean, how was Arpats? Was he?
He was very good.
Was he?
You don't actually.
Batman?
You don't actually get too much of Robert Pattinson as Bruce Wayne because he spends so long as Batman, and when he's Batman, he just sort of doesn't talk as much as a regular person or a regular actor. So he's very good. I don't know if I think he's sort of overshadowed in the movie by Paul Dano and Zoe Kravitz and the overall film, but he does a very, very good job. I was skeptical, I'll admit it, but he does a good job. Very,
I'm sure Arpats will be thrilled when he listens
90s grunge vibe. Yeah. You're welcome, Robert.
Yeah, I saw the trailer. It looked very Nirvana, like eyeliner type.
Yeah.
Kurt Cobain era.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
You can tell that's definitely an inspiration.
I'm curious, but I don't seek out that sort of thing. But perhaps,
just
I'll look
if it ever comes across your screen one day, let me know.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're moving to something which is probably, I don't know, pretty dark in theme in lots of ways, but pretty light in terms of aesthetic, which is The Sun Also Rises. So I thought maybe where should we start? We talk when we first read this book, or do you want to do a plot overview? Do you have any?
I've got like a short little plot overview I wrote, if you want me to read that.
Yeah, hit me.
Pernod parties, expatriates and bullfights. Hemingway's first novel follows a group of American and British expatriates holding up in Paris before they ventured down to Spain to watch the bullfights. Through the course of their adventure, their jealousy, anger, drunkenness, and a bit of Spanish sun, and then I sort of go off on a little tangent saying there's something missing from them in the glittering Spanish streets. But that is essentially the movie. It's a little adventure story from Paris down to Spain to watch the bullfights, a group of people, and that's basically it. There's obviously relationships in there that we will touch on, I'm sure, but that's the overall vibe. Did you want to add anything?
No, that sounds pretty good. I mean, there's not much of a story to it. It's kind of what happens along the way, and how these 20-somethings from the lost generation interact and deal with each other. So that's pretty good. I imagine I only just remembered that we have a one-word synopsis. Did you have one of yours?
Yes. I had 2 words, chaotic and shallow.
Wow. Chaotic and shallow. Okay. Does this mean that you did not like this book?
No, I love this book.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, no, I really like this book. We'll get to that. What was your one-word summation?
I'm just gonna. I had forgotten about this, so let's
wing it.
I'm gonna go with trauma.
Trauma, yes, that's good. Yeah.
Trauma. It's a book about trauma in my eyes, but So when did you first read this book?
I'm thinking just before I went to Israel, so the back end of 2019. No, because that would be COVID. Oh no, COVID-19 started in December. So yeah, September 2019, somewhere around then.
That must have been probably like smack bang in the middle of your 20s as well, like approximate.
Hemingway and just time. Before I was about to, at that stage I knew I was setting off for Israel on my little adventure, let's call it, finishing my master's.
Did you feel like it was a book for the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. When I read it, I loved it. It was fantastic. And I think it's just what I needed as well. Like, there's just some stuff going on in my life at that stage, and I was looking forward to going to Israel and just getting out of Sydney. And then I read this book and I was like, oh, this is cool. This is very, very cool. But then I read it again 2 weeks ago, and much different read this time.
Oh, yeah.
Still a good read, but much different read. But I'm sure we'll touch on that. When did you read this book?
I actually can't remember. I was trying to think of that as well, but I think it must have been maybe when I was mid to early 20s. Not sure exactly. It was a long time ago, and I haven't read it in full since. So I'm kind of coming at this with like trying to remember all my thoughts from my first reading and having kind of encountered sections of it and essays on it and ideas about it in the kind of years since. And I don't know, I was kind of tempted to wonder what it was like the second time. But I think one of the great things about Sun Also Rises, of course, it's a good, like any great book, it must change depending on when you read it. You can also read this book at any period of life. You know, you can read it at high school, you can read it at the height of your kind of like literary hunger, and it'll always, I don't know, be satiating. It'll always slake the need because it's just that great combination of, I mean, that's why it's so modernistic, of high and low. And I think at the time, or I mean, maybe you can describe what happened between your readings, but the big thing I took away from The Sun Also Rises, and I think it's a book which I think it's probably the book I've talked about with men the most in my life.
Interesting.
Partially because most people have read Hemingway, and if they've read Hemingway, they've probably read The Sun Also Rises. But also because I think a lot of men do have to confront a lot of these big issues that come up in The Sun Also Rises. And yeah, so how did your two readings change, did you think?
I think the first time looking down, being early 20s and looking down, going to Israel, I was in the mood for an adventure. So it was very much just an adventure story and just a lot of fun, like traveling down all through France and then into Spain. The fishing scene was just fantastic, and then getting there and just watching the bullfights was just glittering. But then the second time I was fully aware of the story, and I was like, whoa, there is some dark shit going on here that I definitely missed the first time.
Oh, yeah. And the fishing scene's the heart of everything. I mean, the fishing scene I remember vividly because that's the real crux of the novel. I mean, not only is it... So for those, I mean, yes, you have this journey coming from the expats. They're all in their mid-20s. Some of them are poor. Some of them have got money. Jake Barnes, who's based off Hemingway pretty closely, he has a bit of money. He wants to take everyone down to the bullfights in Pamplona and go fishing on the way. And there's Robert Conn, who's... Is it Robert Conn? Yeah, Robert Conn, who's a kind of Princeton boxer or a Yale boxer. Jewish, which is important because there's a fair bit of anti-Semitic treatment of him throughout the book. There is Brett, who is a kind of English aristocratic lady in some sense, but very much the apple of all of these different men's eyes. They all love her. Actually, they all think they love her. Only Jake really loves her. The rest of them are just kind of fascinated by her and want to possess her and make her their ideal woman. And she just kind of wants to fuck everyone. That's because she's just come out of a disastrous relationship herself. So everyone in the story is traumatized by World War One. And Jake Barnes himself, like Hemingway, has a kind of big traumatic event. I mean, Hemingway was like fucked up with shrapnel all up his leg and stuff. And although it's not said specifically in the book, Hemingway clarifies later that basically Jake Barnes has had his dick shot off. His testicles remain in place, which means he has all of his urges and everything else, but he's impotent. And so he has this, there's all the men are traumatized in some way and can't get over their traumas, and so there's this big kind of constant narrative of the lost generation and how are they going to overcome the trauma of the war, how's the world going to overcome this, and then how are the people and their individual traumas going to try and live with those limitations or overcome them, or all these kind of things, all the while they're just drinking wine every 2 sentences on this big trip. And then it gets to the fishing trip, and it's the most peaceful part of the whole journey because it's just Bill, the American friend, who's only just kind of like pops up for this period, and Jake, and they're talking about old times and all this kind of stuff. And it's when Jake admits that he's loved Brett all this whole time, and it's when they talk about the injury, and you also just get that kind of very blatant symbolism of Jake fishes with worms, little worms, and Bill fly fishes, and they both catch fish, and it just doesn't quite bring in what another man, a full man in the eyes of the book, can bring in, and that kind of stuff just plays out continually. And so you've always got this, I don't know, vibe of emasculation and hyper Hemingway masculinity, and I mean it's always just an interesting book to give to, I don't know, people who haven't read Hemingway and just think of him as such a machistic and misogynistic person. Not to say excuse him for any of the way he treated his wives or anyone. He was a pretty mercurial, probably bipolar person, and definitely a serial liar and all this kind of stuff. But a great artist, and he had the balls at 25 to emasculate himself for his literature, for what he thought was the good idea. And in a way, it's kind of the most biggest dick flop out move of all time. Like, he shot himself in the dick in a book, and it's the biggest big dick energy book of all time. Yeah. So he kind of faked everyone out there. Everyone was like, "Oh shit." I love the fishing scene though. I think I've read that back a few times for sure because it is marvelous. And I've also spent so much time in that area of the world just by chance, just because I have friends who live there, and so all the places have my own rings to them and stuff. God, have you been to that part of the world? Have you been to Basque country?
I haven't actually, and it is a place I want to go because that fishing scene is just it's so vivid and, as you said, so peaceful. Like, there's so much chaos going on either side of the book, and that just sort of neatly slots in the middle, and they just take a couple bottles of wine, they've got their chicken sandwiches, and they're just fishing, and then like a bit of swimming, and then a bit more fishing, bit of drinking, and just sleeping, and it's just, it's such a nice idea.
Yeah.
To have that.
And Robert Conn doesn't go as well, and he's this kind of constant tension because Robert Conn is in love with Brett, or thinks he is, and keeps pursuing her and trying to find ways, but she's not interested anymore. She just kind of had a fling with him, and she's still really in love with Jake, but he can't consummate, and she doesn't, so there's just something missing.
She doesn't want to give up sex.
Yeah, well, just something that isn't quite clicking, that he can't quite get over, and I don't know, it's such a difficult novel. And then, the bullfighting is, of course, this big thing, which we get to. And, of course, the whole thing is that there's the bulls and then there's the steers, the castrated bulls. And so all the kind of guys, Jake and Robert, and they're all these castrated bulls. And they get down to Spain eventually, and there's, oh, God, what's the Spanish bullfighter called? I can't remember his name.
Romero. Is it Romero?
Oh, yes. I haven't seen a bullfighter like him for a while. They said something like that. Yeah, God. Oh, my God. Yeah. So, and I remember, because when we were talking about this, doing The Sun Also Rises, and you are not a fan of the opening gambit, I guess you'd call it. So, I don't know. Why not?
They start off in Paris. It's a very short book. I've got it here next to me, and it's only 212 pages or something, 216 pages. So it's a relatively short book, and 70 of those pages you spend in Paris sort of faffing around, just doing Hemingway things, living basically his life in going to different bars every night and going to dinner with a prostitute and then abandoning her to chase Brett. And it's interesting. It's good. I've got no issue with the storyline of it, but it just doesn't fit with this book, I don't think. At least 70 pages worth. It's a different story that he just sort of slots in. I don't think we needed 70 pages of Paris before we set off on the adventure, because it's a bit excessive. I understand he had to set the story up somehow, but not for 70 pages. I mean, did you like Paris?
Yes. I mean, I think... I certainly didn't think that, that's not the part of the book that I remember. But I do know it's a part of the book that's necessary, because you do so much of the character work is in there. It's not like in... And Then There Were None... we did recently, where there's a character list at the start and you get all the details. You have to have the meeting with the prostitute and the encounter where Jake reveals that he can't, or that he can't do certain things and all this kind of stuff. And you have to have the tension with Brett, and you have to have all this other stuff, because you get that idea. And I think part of the length, I don't remember it being particularly long, but I do remember it being, or the distinction between the Basque and the French, or the Spanish and the French, being that Paris really symbolized the lost generation and this kind of the new world, the post-war world, where it was just kind of like drinking and everyone's just kind of lost and going from cafe to cafe. No one really knows anything. Some people have money now, some people don't, some people are waiting, some people aren't. And it's just a mess. And no one really knows what to do in the modern world anymore, now that everything's changed. But then they're going back to Spain. It's still a decade before the Civil War. Spain is still the old Europe. It's still old values. It's still honor and chivalry and all these kind of things. I think Hemingway was, I think if the Paris bit was too short, you wouldn't have had that contrast of old to new, which he was trying to get. But the other interesting thing, which I didn't know when I first read The Sun Also Rises, but I read later because I read a very great book about Hemingway, and it kind of talked about all the different editing that went through on this book. And there's a great letter which I read from F. Scott Fitzgerald, who was had kind of got Hemingway this publisher to publish this book. And the first draft, or the first draft he sent to the editor, was also provided to F. Scott Fitzgerald. And F. Scott Fitzgerald writes Hemingway. He writes this big long letter, you can read it online, in which he more or less says, basically from like chapter 5, approximately like page 80, whatever it is, onwards is brilliant. Everything before that is shit. And he goes page by page, like this does this does that. You need to fix this, you need to fix that. And you can read the opening chapters of what it was before the actual published version. He made all of Fitzgerald's changes and basically changed the whole course of the book with Fitzgerald's changes. And it basically made the book. Of course, Hemingway didn't attribute Fitzgerald at all, but that's just standard Hemingway taking all the kudos.
Yes.
But let me just tell you, I think the published version with all the changes and everything begins something, I can't remember exactly, like Robert Conn was a champion boxer or something like that. And then you kind of it goes into this narrative and you're there. This is how it starts in the version that Fitzgerald read. This is a novel about a lady. Her name is Lady Ashley, and when the story begins, she's living in Paris and it is spring. That should be a good setting for a romantic but highly moral story. And it continues like that. It's basically meta. It's like Ryan Reynolds. Like, he's explaining what the story is the whole time. Even Fitzgerald's like, what are you doing? Like, it's like so meta. And he goes, and Jake, who's a lot like me, like the author is Hemingway. God, like it's really blatant and obvious and weird, and journalistic and something like that. And Fitzgerald was obviously just like, you've got talent, but you need to do a lot of changing it up here. And it's good once the story starts.
Because this is
like,
his first book.
Well, he'd written Torrents of Spring, which was a kind of parody of Sherwood Anderson, and actually I read that. It was the first Hemingway I read, and it's not good. Hemingway scholars like it. I don't really understand it. I think I was probably too young, but I don't think anyone really thinks it's that good. More or less, it's just a guy walking along the train tracks for like 150 pages, and going into a diner and eating cake and chatting up a waitress. I don't remember much, but but there's a good one of Fitzgerald's critiques is it just goes, somehow it's not good. I can't quite put my hand on it. It has the ring of, this is a true story, etc., 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 which is kind of like the perfect critique of what Hemingway was doing at the start. But I don't know, it's so interesting because actually it would have been so much worse had Hemingway gone with what he first wanted
That's
to do.
very true. I think when I read it the first time, I had no real issues with the para section. I think it's just the second time you go back and you realize how long it is, because like you said, you don't remember it being that long. And I think you don't think it's that long because once you're out of it, the story just is so much better. But I think it was the second time I was reading, I was like, oh my God, this is dragging on a little bit too much.
Yeah.
But
what can you do? But people like that, and there's a whole tourism around following Hemingway's footsteps, and from Paris all the way down to Basque, Spain, and people go to Montparnasse and all the cafes and all this kind of stuff, and I don't know, people love it. Even before A Movable Feast was published, people were doing that. So I don't know.
Yeah, because Hemingway lived this story.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great book called Everybody Behaves Badly by Leslie Bloom, who I think she's a contributing editor at Vanity Fair, where she basically just tells the story behind the story, and a lot of critics of the book. Most of the main negative critics of the book were people who were actually in the book, I think, from what I can tell, like Robert Cohen and all these people. That wasn't their real names, but yeah, basically they were like, this is not fiction. This is reportage. He's basically just told exactly what happened.
Yeah.
But of course he haven't. I don't know. It's a Ramona Clay. It's a, one of these stories, and it's based off true events, and he's just had his little way with it, and that's kind of all fiction. But it was a massive success at the time, and I guess the Paris stuff also would have been new to a lot of people at the time, where maybe by the time we're reading it, it seems a bit, 20s Paris. We know it pretty well.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Oh, I love it. I've got my issues with it being in this story. As a story, it's very well written, and I would have liked to have seen more, but just not in this book, because 70 pages is too bloody long, Hemingway.
And so what did you like about the book then? What were some of your... What was the vibe? I mean, obviously you like the style. I know you're a fan of Spartan style.
His lucid, sparse writing style. I'm a big fan of. It's very wild. I think the second time I noticed a lot more how there's no words wasted, and it's not overwritten in the sense of his writing style. It's obviously, I think, overwritten in the Paris scene, but it's not overwritten in his style of writing. And I think, and I don't know if he was doing this on purpose, but I think that his writing style exactly mimics what the characters are. It's a very stripped back writing style, and his characters are all incredibly shallow and stripped back people. And so to me, it's one of those stories that you can know the story, you can spoil the story for someone, and they can read it and still get a lot of enjoyment out of. It's not a story... There's no surprises or anything like that. Like, if someone told me the entire story, and then, if you listened to this podcast, for instance, and then went back and read it for the first time, I think you'd still get a lot out of it. And you might even get more than initially on that first read.
Yeah, I mean, because there isn't really much to spoil. There's no kind of, big thing. I mean, there is a loose plot, but, that brings it up to something else. I mean, in terms of the style, I mean, I also love Hemingway's style, especially at this stage. This is kind of the perfect nook where, it kind of gets a bit tired after this in certain sections, sometimes in For Whom the Bell Tolls and things like that. You're a bit over it, and then he tries to experiment more and he changes it up. But this is when it was so fresh, and he really struck a big modernistic chord, and I really like it. And he had so much influence from people around him and from Cézanne. This is one of the great reasons why Cézanne is, I think, or people call him the last great French master, because he was this big link between the past and the present, where Hemingway goes to Gertrude Stein's salon and, sees all these Cézannes on the walls, and he looks at these big, thick brushstrokes and how simple they seem, but how complex and layered they are underneath, to come out with this picture. And he decides to basically base his whole style off that. And that's how it comes out. And of course, what all these guys, Fitzgerald and they're trying to rebel against the old Jamesian and Victorian and Edwardian ideas of language in books, and they want to do it more true to life. No one really speaks, on a fishing trip is going to speak like they do in a Henry James novel. They're going to speak like they do, like you said, stripped back. No one, especially when you're traumatized and everything else, you're holding so much in that when, you're questioned on things, you're having conversations, you kind of only let little pieces of yourself out. You don't want to, you're only throwing little worms out to try and catch other people. You don't have too much that you can give away. You're a bit nervous, I think. And so that's why it works so perfectly with those characters.
Yep.
And especially because you do get that's what keeps the story going, because there isn't that much of a story, but you want to see what everything is holding back for, what everything's going to culminate in this big, crescendo. But there's also, what I was going to ask you is, there's kind of, almost 100 years since publication, comparative periods of history in terms of global trauma, not so much, not only did they have the Spanish flu 100 years ago, but they also had World War One. But we do have a big COVID, and who knows, maybe we do have another World War coming.
World War III coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But certainly, I don't know, what do you think about how, reading this recently, do you think it was something which is still timely? And how do you think, considering how this generation, this lost generation, reacted to their trauma, I don't know, do you have much hope for our generation and younger generations?
When I read it, I actually thought of a question that I was going to ask you, because I think in this book, alcohol is incredibly important. It's incredibly prevalent throughout the entire novel, and it's the numbing agent used by all the men and women to just avoid dealing with themselves and their issues, which is something we spoke about last week in the depression episode. So yeah, I think that's incredibly still very relevant to ourselves. But what I wanted to ask you in return was, it's a true story in that Hemingway lived it. Do you think he was self-aware of the damage he was doing in abusing alcohol, or was he just blind to the truth so that he could capture it so fervently and be basically not aware of the damage he was doing?
And what damage in terms of damage to his
just
physical
alcohol
body?
abuse and mentally, physical body, but just not dealing with anything like that. Like, do you think he was aware he was doing it and they're all doing it? Because he's captured it perfectly in this book. They're all broken characters just using alcohol to cover up the fact that they're broken. Do you think he was aware of that? Because he himself was just a massive drinker.
Yeah. And I think he's he was a big drinker, but he's also, he's a big embellisher. And he certainly embellishes lots of, aspects of what made him so famous just beyond his literary work. And I mean, obviously in this book, drinking is exaggerated. But at the same time, it is a bunch of 20-somethings going on a 1-week festival trip out of their year. It's not just, if you're writing the amount of drinks you have when I'm in my early 20s and I was going to a festival in Spain, which I have done, and I was talking about how much I drank a fuckload. And for most of my 20s, I drank a fuckload. And as an expat, you drink a fuckload because you just go out to meet other expats and to do things and stuff, and just drinking is a big part of it. But obviously, I don't know, Hemingway I think he uses it because it soaks into the page and it kind of lubricates the whole story. He can connect little sections through the drinking. You can just move from bar to bar, drink to drink, and then we drank with these people, and then we drank with those people, and then we got on the bus, and then the Basque guys were handing us wine, and then we got there and we had a Pernod, and then, I think it just keeps this this kind of, I think, to answer your question, I think it's partially a literary device, definitely embellished. Partially there's some truth in it, that they were heavily drinking and going out, and they were at a big festival, and I think Hemingway, went 3 or 4 times. It was his favourite trip of the year when he lived in Paris. It's the kind of thing he saved up for and all this kind of stuff. And I think he goes there to blow a gasket, basically. So he's treating it like it's a big blowout, and it is a fucking big blowout.
It's a very big blowout.
Yeah. But yeah, I also think that was just the time. I mean, it's post World War One. They're all traumatized by something, and they live in Paris, and everything, booze is cheap. I mean, I know from living in Berlin, where booze has been cheap still, that you just indulge it because it's cheap. That you just you drink whenever because you can. So it's just like, why would you have something? Why would you go and have an expensive coffee instead at a cafe when you can have a drink for half the price? You may as well start now.
That's crazy.
Not the same anymore, but I think that was just the vibe. I mean, and like you said, it just numbs you and just keeps you floating along.
Yeah. Poor lad. But
in the end, he didn't die from alcohol. I mean, he died because he was severely mentally disabled.
He shot himself.
He was disturbed.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of scholarship on Hemingway's embellishment and the lengths he would go to make his lifestyle look a certain way, and the Hemingway daiquiri and all these kind of inventions and stuff. It's all a bit much.
Yeah.
I think he tried. There's even stories that he tried to say he invented the Bloody Marys to mask his breath from his second wife and all this kind of stuff. And none of it's true.
Of course not. No, but that's Hemingway. That actually leads into
a good storyteller.
He is a very good storyteller, and that's important. That is very important. But that leads into a quote I had. This occurs kind of early in the book, and it's about expatriates. It's while they're still in Paris. And it's one I kind of liked because it feels like it's very, very true and still quite relevant. You're an expatriate. You've lost touch with the soil. You get precious. Fake European standards have ruined you. You drink yourself to death. You become obsessed with sex. You've ruined your time talking, not working. You're an expatriate, see? You hang around cafes. And to me, I feel like that just captures so many people, all the expatriates. I mean, as an expatriate yourself, in a loose sense, how do you feel?
I don't know if it's a loose sense. I mean, I think I am, and I have been for a long time. I think at the time, it's one of the epigraphs to the book from Gertrude Stein that, you are all a lost generation. This is a book about this lost generation. And a lot of people felt pride in that, and I think felt pride in being part of this generation. And the expats in Paris, I think, were especially vibrant. But I think it's very easy with books like this and with Hemingway's kind of public image, that there's a lot of glorification about this kind of life. And I don't know. You think you have to remember in the first place, like, why someone is an expat generally. I mean, some people just do it because, Combank has an office in New York, so they're going to go spend 2 years there and take photos of themselves in Soho or whatever. And in London, that's just a tourist. But, nothing... People who are real expats, I guess, are there because it feels easier to be lost abroad than feeling lost at home, which is probably how they felt in the first place and why they left. And so these people are just wandering and they're still lost, and it's a kind of double lostness of not knowing where the world is headed and also just being in a kind of a jungle. And so I think it was a big turning point in literature as well. Previously, especially in American literature, you had this kind of Henry James international theme where expats or people go to Europe or go to other places in order to test their native values, their morals, their ideas about America, and then they come back as either better Americans or with a sense of pride for their own country, all these kind of things. And then you have the modernists who kind of come out and they're more just... they're kind of going abroad to escape American morality, to escape all that kind of stuff, and to just kind of get this safe distance, and you see, what they could do. And I think also part of that, and what is... Actually, this probably should have been my one-word summary. I mean, it's a hyphenated word. But bittersweet, I think, is
that's a good word.
For me, the crux of this story. And the last line is one of my favourite lines in all of modernist literature, and it really chimes with The Great Gatsby as well. I mean, two of the saddest lines. Isn't it pretty to think so?
Yes.
And that really captures it, which is just, this... We talked about it in a Little Life episode, the idea of, literary pessimism or optimism. And that, in A Little Life, almost 100 years after, modernism bursts on the scene, Hanya Yanagihara wants to write a book about someone who is not going to evolve past their trauma. And then here's Hemingway, and the other modernists after the fissure of World War One, and they are they've been taught that there is no such thing as a happy ending, that people just get blown up that shit just happens. There's collateral damage, lives just end. There's Spanish flu, and they have, a very distaste for that Victorian idea of novels that have the evolutionary development, that someone improves and gets better and they're rewarded for it by some improvement in their lives.
Yeah. Because there's a book I read. Sorry, you go on.
No, you.
There's a book I read, sounds similar to the one you mentioned, The Paris Wife, and it's written by a woman called Paula McLean, and she writes it from Hadley Richardson's point of view, and it's about when she meets Hemingway, and then they sort of get married and go on, and then eventually go on this trip to Spain that becomes the book. But very early in her book, they get married, and she writes the line something like, "No one got married anymore. To get married was to believe in a future." And that's exactly what you're saying. Like, they just didn't know what was coming anymore.
Yeah. And to be optimistic about anything going forward, isn't it pretty to think so? Isn't it pretty to think like that? It's kind of, in the 1920s, the great answer for the 20th century. Every question the 20th century tried to ask, can we create a utopia in the East or the West? And everything that happened to completely the opposite of those two ideals. Isn't it pretty to think that you can create these utopias? And of course, in that scene, in the culminating scene, this beautiful scene, which I don't know, has stuck in my memory so powerfully all these years, and I've always thought of it. And it's been often a very actually not determining, but poignant emotional reminder in some of my own relationships of where my heart is at and things like that. And when to end things. And here's Jake, and he goes to Madrid finally, and Brett's there, and she's saying, I wish we could just be together. Imagine the life we could have. Yeah. And he knows the whole book is, he's been facing this trauma, and the kind of great growth, all the, which despite all the pessimism of the lost generation, this is the sun also rises. There is a kind of stoicism in Hemingway, which I think is what is also really, bittersweet, that not only do you get, okay, there's a harsh reality that we all have to live with now, but the sun also rises. And I'm learning to live with my limitations. I'm learning to live that I can love you, and I'm just going to have to love you from afar. And I'm more or less, the kind of, this book is about how to love someone and set them free, which is what Jake has to do for Brett. And, wouldn't it, imagine if we could just, the life we could have together. And, and she slides across the car as they come up to a roundabout in Madrid, and they go around the roundabout, and she slides up against him. And he says, "Yeah, isn't it pretty to think so?"
Isn't it pretty to think so?
It's just like, rip my heart out and throw it in the street.
So that's
God.
What did you think of the title then?
I mean, I think it's a great title. Ecclesiastes is from there's a quote at the beginning. I can't remember how the quote actually goes, but I know you're fond of the English publisher's title, which I think was an early draft, which he didn't go with, Fiesta.
Fiesta. Mine says, Fiesta ... The sun also rises.
Right, okay, so they're publishing it like that these days.
Yeah.
I think I prefer The Sun Also Rises. I think that's a lot more evocative of the heart of the book. Fiesta's too shallow, and the Fiesta isn't, much to do with what the book is trying to get across, I think.
So do you think it's more a nod to Jake's impotence, or the lost expats' disillusionment, sort of their amoral life that they're living, or a bit of both?
Fiesta.
The sun also rises.
I think. I mean, it's just everything. It's post World War One, birth of a new era, jazz age, and everyone's bitter and spoiled and lost. But the sun also rises, and there can be a new day. It doesn't mean it's going to be better, but there's going to be another one, and you're just going to have to learn to live with. Hemingway's just going to have to learn to live with all the shrapnel in his leg, and he's going to have to learn to live with what he did to Hadley. And that's why he gave all of the proceeds of this book, which was wildly successful, to her, even after he'd left her. And her kid just left them. And I think he regretted it till his dying day. Not so much that he regretted, maybe the relationship was done, but how he did it and all those kind of things. But he did, that's one of the interesting things, and definitely one of the things which Bloom talks about in Everybody Behaves Badly, is that Hemingway, mercurial as he was, he had this ability to, or not ability, it's kind of just a proclivity to be at once capable of, spontaneous destruction of a relationship, and at the same time enormous repentance and frustration with himself. And like he said, he had this massive ambition, Hemingway. You can read in all of his early letters that he's just like, I want to be a great writer. It pisses me off that, like a bullfighter will walk down the street and everyone applauds them, and that a writer doesn't get any kudos until they're in their 90s and all this kind of stuff. And he's aware that he has talent. He's aware that he just wants to get something major published. And of course he does it, and then he gets the fame straight away. And all the proceeds of this wildly successful book don't even go to him. But thankfully now he has a reputation where from the rest of his life, anything he puts his name to will get published. But I don't know. He's just such an interesting character. That's why he's still so. I don't know. Everyone's still. He's
prevalent.
Still making money. He's still in print all over the world, and kids, high school kids, are still reading him. He's
we're just talking
everywhere.
about him.
Yeah. And so, which title do you prefer?
Well, since I'm graced with a book that gives me both, I'm quite happy with that, which is good.
Yeah, take both.
Yeah, why not? But yeah, I think The Sun Also Rises obviously captures the story. Fiesta is just kind of like, Fiesta, and it's about a fiesta. But The Sun Also Rises captures so much of the story in so few words.
Also, Fiesta is just so un-Hemingway. If you think of Hemingway's a great man of titles. Farewell to Arms, Islands in a Stream,
A Movable
The
Feast.
Old Man in the Sea, Movable Feast. And then just Fiesta,
Fiesta.
No, it sticks out.
Fiesta.
The Sun Also Rises it's a great title. What did you think of, or what is your vibe on the bullfighting? This is a very controversial aspect of Hemingway in the last 50 years, I guess.
In terms of it being bullfighting and the fact that it's a bullfight, which is animal abuse, or the sort of
Hemingway.
Go on.
I don't know. Hemingway just kind of sees it as an art form. Hemingway sees everything as an art form in some way, and a way to be better than someone at something. But as a literary device, I think it works really well. But a lot of people are pretty turned off by it. But I guess to Hemingway's credit, there's one character, I can't even remember who it was. It's probably like a waiter or something, who expresses their distaste. So even though Hemingway is a big approver of it, he does put someone in there, even to say that opinion isn't unanimous.
Yes, no, because there is a waiter that is against it, and Robert Cones, he's not against it in that he goes, but he feels a bit sick, and it sort of makes him a bit queasy. Which then people go on to say is Hemingway's anti-Semitism coming out to play because Robert Cohen's the only Jewish person there as well. It's one of those things that I have the same feeling with the bullfights as I do with Moby Dick, in that I'd love to be in that situation. I'd love to go to a bullfight. I'd love to be on a whaling ship, because they're just great stories. They're great adventure stories. But I live in the modern world and know that those things are not good. So that's sort of my vibe, in that I'd love to be on a boat chasing a whale because it's a fucking fantastic story. But I know whaling is bad. So that's sort of my view.
Yeah. You can go, you just don't have to chuck a spear at it, I guess.
Yeah, you can just go look at them, which is a healthy alternative.
No, you're there. You got to harpoon it. It would. Yeah. But that's. I don't know. I've always found that a bit interesting as well, because I think maybe it wasn't this trip, but one of the earlier trips, or maybe one of the later trips down to the bullfights, he went with his editor, and one of the reasons he gives for his fascination with the bullfights is that he, as a journalist and as someone who fully expects themselves to be describing and documenting the century ahead, he doesn't want to. He wants to kind of get over his gag reflex for all these things. I mean, that's probably why he became an ambulance driver and all these kind of things. He wants to see the gruesomeness and be able to not wince, I think was the quote from one of the letters, or to stop wincing, something like that. Which is an interesting idea that he kind of got into it because he wanted to be able to stand it, that he actually did. It wasn't that he was like loved the gruesomeness 100%. But personally, yeah, I mean, that's maybe one reason why I'll probably never be a great war correspondent or a journalist, is that I don't have much of a stomach for that kind of thing. Yes. I remember once I was in Basque country. I was in Saint-Jean-de-Luz visiting a dear friend of mine, Martin, who lives there, who's from there, and who I've spent a lot of time kind of exploring this area with and drinking a lot of wine. And I asked him if he'd ever been, because they have these festivals like Pamplona and the Running of the Bulls. Now it's part of like a line of Basque festivals which go from different towns, and each one's slightly different and have their own thing. And there's the Bayonne one, which I went to, which is really beautiful, and everyone wears white with red sashes and all this kind of stuff, and drinks gâteau basque, which is an almond cake, and all this kind of is brilliant, and drinks and does all sorts of things. But when I asked him if he'd been to the Running of the Bulls, and whether he thought I should ever go, he played me a song called La Corrida by Francis Cabrel. Do you know this song?
No, not by name at least.
It's a French song. It'd be good for you learning French. I used it to help learn French. It's a beautiful song, and it's from La Corrida is the run in Spanish, and but the song's in French, and it's from the perspective of the bull, and of being released into the arena and all this kind of stuff, and it is so heartbreaking. The refrain of the song is I can't remember exactly, like, is this world serious or something like that. That's what the bull keeps thinking as it's being tormented and tortured and slowly tortured, and then it kind of gets worn down, and then its face is in the sand and the sunlight shining down on it, and it just wants everything to end. Its life is terrible, and it says, Andalusie, je me souviens, I remember Andalusia, all the fields of its youth when it was prancing around and these kind of things. And the first time I was shown this song, I was just like bawling my eyes out, and I was like, never, never will I go. Damn. It's too much. It's too much. Even the Running of the Bulls, I'm just like, no, that's just fucked.
Yeah, that's good. It's a healthy mental attitude case to have.
Yeah. I did go to La Tomatina once, and everyone just throws tomatoes at each other.
It's not
that bad. It's also much more fun. Big festival.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not great either. I don't know. Bit wasty.
It is a bit of a waste, but at least no bulls are dying.
Alas, no bulls are dying.
So that was Fiesta, The Sun Also Rises, Ernest Hemingway. Good book. But the show must go on. So, do you have a literary fact this week?
My literary fact this week is that Hemingway had a 6-toed cat called Snowball.
Oh.
And
very fun.
I don't remember exactly where I heard this, but I, as you know, used to work at a bar in Manly called Hemmingway's, which is themed off the man. And there's lots of there's a bust of Hemingway, and there's lots of photos as you go up the old wooden stairs and stuff of Hemingway at different stages of his life. There's definitely one, late Hemingway. I think he's back in America, and I'm pretty sure that was Snowball, a white cat on his table, and he's sitting there looking pretty forlorn. And I must have heard it somewhere, because every time I walked up the stairs, up and down to take glasses to do something else, I used to think, there's the 6-toed cat Snowball.
6-toed cat Snowball.
It just got stuck in my head. What about you?
That's very fun. Well, I thought I'd mix it up since we've both got degrees in literature, but you went a different route and I've got a degree in history as well. So I thought I'd probably start doing maybe a little history fact each week that's of some useless value. So this week mine is...
All art is useless. Nothing wrong with that.
Thank you, Oscar Wilde. Mine is this week when Alexander the Great was going on his great rampage through sort of the bottom part of Europe and into the Middle East. He came upon a little island that was called Tyre, and it was known as being impregnable, and it was about, I think it was a kilometre off the coast, and there's all these fantastic stories that apparently the people at Tyre, flipping him off and all this kind of outrageous stuff that probably didn't happen. And instead of just moving on, Alexander said, fuck it, and built a causeway, just started picking up rocks and sand, just dumping them into the ocean, and day by day built a causeway out to Tyre and sacked the city. And the fact is that causeway still exists. Tyre is now considered a part of the Lebanon mainland because of Alexander the Great just dumping sand in the sea to flex and flop his dick out.
Wow. His big sandy dick.
Jesus. Yeah. Lucky boy.
Damn. Well, lucky boys who he was sleeping with every night.
Very true. So that was my little fact this week.
That's a good one. What
are you reading this week?
This week I am reading The Yield by Tara June Winch, which won the Miles Franklin Award in, I'll have to look at the 2020 on the cover of my book, which was a gift from you because we're going to do this book soon and I didn't have a copy of it. And I am probably halfway through it and loving it so far. I think it's brilliant and it's very intricately done. But the writing above all else is stunning. And I can't wait to talk about it. It's really
very good. Yeah, I'm keen for that one as well.
And you?
This week, I'm reading a book that we're going to do an episode on soon as well. I'm reading A Gentleman in Moscow.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, this is already a lot of fun. I'm only like 50, 60 pages in, and so far it's a lot of fun. Like, he's just sort of going throughout this hotel, and I don't know where the story's going, but
I mean,
that's
it
what
doesn't leave the hotel. But
no, I'm assuming he doesn't leave the hotel. But
going. It's so good.
Just life in a hotel, which is exciting.
Well,
yeah, so I'm keen to talk about that one as well.
Yeah, I've got some opinions, but I'll hold them back.
Good.
It's a good book. On both books, anyway.
All right, well, that was another episode of On the Same Page. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it.
See you next week.
Ciao.